Good afternoon and welcome to Virtual UKNOF March 2022 edition, a short online event we're having to fill the gap between our first two hybrid meetings, UKNOF 48 and UKNOF 49. I'm Keith Mitchell, UKNOF Forum Chair. We're doing something different today. Instead of focusing on network engineering, we're having a look at the practical experience of various organisations that have run hybrid conference events in our industry. I'm pleased to say this includes speakers from some of the international organisations UKNOF aspires to be a domestic version of. What we share is useful for running hybrid meetings within your own organisations. James Bensley, the UKNOF Programme Chair, will be running the rest of the event. While I'm optimistic that hybrid events will be part of our path out, okay, slight video glitch there. It's one of these Zoom days. While I'm optimistic that hybrid events will be part of our path out of the pandemic, we have had some sad industry news to share with you, and I'm going to hand you over to Steve Karmeinsky, one of UKNOF's longest serving contributors, to say a bit about who we have just lost.
So I'd just like to say, some of you remember Cliff Stanford, who sadly passed away last week after a short illness. Cliff founded Demon Internet, which launched in June '92, with everyone saying you couldn't run a service for $10 a month. And he proved everyone wrong and changed the UK internet forever. So I'd like now to hold a minute's silence in his memory. Okay, thanks everyone, and over to James.
Thanks, Steve. That was very considerate. That's a huge loss to the UK industry indeed. So I shall start and say hello everyone, and just check you can all hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. So hello everyone, and welcome to the Virtual UKNOF March 2022. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is James Bensley, and I'm the Programme Committee Chair here. And just before we get started, we're going to have some presentations from our industry experts shortly, but I'm just going to take everyone through a few housekeeping guidelines before we get started. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is a virtual event, obviously, and that's a huge part of the topic today. But on the UKNOF website, we have a respect policy, which we normally point out to our attendees for our physical meetups. But this applies to our virtual meetups equally. UKNOF is a sort of open and fair place where we respect each other and present. So we expect that people have read that and take that into consideration when they participate in our events. The second thing to point out is that we have our Mattermost chat platform. So if people want to join in with chat, please go to uknof.org/chat sign up. You can join the chats over there. There's a general chat channel called Town Square where you can have free form talk, but you can also DM each other and speak with the presenters and this kind of thing. And also there's a link here at the bottom of the slides for uknof.uk/March 2022, which will be to a survey. So please, at the end of the event, fill out the survey. If there's something you like or something you don't like, if you don't tell us about it, we can't improve it. So please fill out the survey. We really appreciate that. The second thing to run through is questions. So there'll be no Q&A during the first half of the event. The first half of the event is we're going to have all of our panel members give a brief introduction to who they are, the event or the industry they work in, and some lessons learned. And in the second half, we're going to have a panel session. So Q&A will be active in the second half when the panel session starts. Now the audience is muted by default. So there's two ways you can ask questions in the second half. The first is to use the Q&A button in Zoom. You can enter a question in there, and then we've got some Q&A monitors who will read it out for you if you don't want to read out your question. If you want to read out your question yourself, then use the raise hand feature. And then again, one of our Q&A monitors will keep an eye out for that. They'll unmute you and ask you to identify yourself and your affiliation. So please just state who you are and your affiliation, and then read out your question as loudly and as clearly as you can. And the questions will be on a first come, first served basis. So we may not have time for all the questions. If that does happen, then as I mentioned in the previous slide, please join the Mattermost channel. All the speakers are in there, all the crew are in there. Any questions, not just about the panelists or their presentations, but about the event. If you need help with anything, we're all on Mattermost ready to help. So that pretty much covers the housekeeping stuff. So now I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. And the first speaker we're going to have is Marek Isalski. He's the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the UKNOF PC. And Marek's going to be talking about some of the UKNOF experiences that we've made from running hybrid events. So Marek, could you unmute and share your screen?
I shall do that just now. So hopefully you're now seeing my first slide.
Yep, I can see you and I can hear you. Yep.
Brilliant. Then I shall start. Hello, everyone. My name's Marek Isalski. As James has already introduced me, I'm one of the co-chairs at the UKNOF Programme Committee, and I'm going to be talking about how we ran UKNOF 48, which is the first hybrid event that UKNOF has run. You might ask the question, why are we still thinking about hybrid events? Because certainly in the UK, the current situation is very relaxed, and pretty much all COVID restrictions were lifted last month. But in spite of this, I think the UKNOF crew consensus is that both caution is prudent, but also COVID led our digital transformation is something of a meme. And we already had some online participation, but maybe the pandemic has helped us to grow that and make it better. So during the pandemic, we ran a number of virtual UKNOFs, which were all lightning talks, round about 6, 10 to 15 minute talks each. We ran 2 full-scale UKNOFs of the usual programme, up to 30-minute talks each. And this sort of event programme evolved based on feedback. So initially we had no breaks, and gradually, based on the feedback, we ended up with a sort of programme that seemed to work. But by the time it came to UKNOF 48, there was an option to do a real physical event as well, and it would have a slightly different programme, as we'll soon see. In the background to all this, the UK is also blessed with a couple of other events, Net Manchester and Net London, which are monthly short events, and the theme we tried to match with UKNOF was to make sure that these events could all coexist and there wasn't a feeling of people pinching each other's speakers, so that the spirit of each of these separate events could continue. By the time UKNOF came around, UKNOF 48 came around, well, we'd actually already committed to this venue, a venue booking just prior to the pandemic. Vaccination statistics were encouraging, and the various committees at UKNOF decided we'd try and hold a virtual and physical event and manage things like the risks of airborne infections. Hybrid would present its own challenges. For the programme committee, pretty much nothing had changed during the switch to virtual events. The same sort of reviewing and shepherding of the programme still applied. But the on-the-day event crew had made huge changes in the entire workflow to put on virtual events. And a lot of this had been a sort of just-in-time learning experience, supplemented with a lot of rehearsals with technical crew, speakers and session chairs. After 7 events in the virtual world, we'd, kind of found our feet and felt we knew what we were doing, but could we remember how to put on in-person events? And now we want to combine the two, and there could be some challenges here. Did we have anybody else who'd had experience of running fully hybrid events? And were their learning points applicable, because had they been doing this pre-pandemic? And what challenges might COVID add for us? These were all questions we were asking ourselves. So in terms of the schedule of UKNOF 48, we had the venue for 2 days, which meant we decided on doing a very early load-in and splitting the actual conference over an afternoon and a morning, which would then give us time for AGMs and other business before loading out on the second day. It also meant we had a very, very tight time schedule for getting rehearsals and sound check done just before the actual event. So the local volunteers arrived very early to the conference centre, established the IT connectivity with our venue connectivity and Portfast, our partner for that. And Bogons also arrived early that morning to set up the streaming rig. They're our partner that does the AV side on there, which then meant we had a last chance for rehearsal, sound check and showtime. So to fit with that sort of very tight timescale, there'd been a lot of pre-conference communications of different diagrams of how are we going to connect things together and which way are things going to get sent. And there'd been a lot of preparation in advance of this, so that when we actually got there on the final day, it actually started to look like it would make sense. And what did it look like when we were there? Well, this picture here taken by one of the attendees shows we were very, very spaced out. We were lucky to be able to have such a large venue. And so we could actually spread out everybody to manage the sort of contamination aspects and work with the venue in terms of high levels of ventilation. Here you can see we've got 2 screens up at the front. We've got our usual lectern and AV system. And this is very much how we were going to run the event on the day, very similar to how we've done other in-person events as well, but obviously with some changes because now we're hybrid. Our usual sort of data flow within the live presentations at the venue is you've got a speaker at the lectern, they've got a slide clicker that controls the laptop with the slides on. And you can see here the various flows of sound and video going out to the stream and to the screens within the venue. And that ended up looking like a sort of regular UKNOF, which, looked like this. A lot of our speakers were remote and the slides were actually driven locally, which meant that we'd get the best quality in terms of graphics. And that's why you'll hear them saying, next slide, please. It's because whoever was driving that laptop needed a cue. But other than that, the sort of overall flow of audio and video was fairly similar and ended up looking a bit like a hybrid of our in-person events and the virtual UKNOFs we'd held before. One speaker gave a pre-recorded talk, reason being they were concerned about the quality of their internet connection, but they joined again via Zoom like the remote speakers had for a live Q&A. So the video playout was handled from Bogons and they then joined from Zoom to answer questions live. And this again looked pretty similar to all the other talks that had been given. And finally, there was one speaker who needed to be able to change their own slides. They had a lot of transitions to work through. And there we simplified it a little further with just using Zoom and then streaming out to the screens locally and to the stream on the internet. And again, this sort of ended up looking pretty much like most of our usual conference content. How did the conference work out as a whole then? Well, it may be a little unfair to compare UKNOF 48, our first hybrid event, with UKNOF 45, which was the last full physical event in London, partly because the Manchester events tend to attract a slightly smaller audience than those in London. However, it's the most recent set of figures we've got, so I'll use that as our basis. In-person registrations were a little lower, so we had 122 who'd registered to attend in Manchester. 88 attended in the end, which represents a similar level of no-show to previous events that UKNOF has run that were free to register. The remote participants, however, shows a huge difference. Peak streams of 45 for the London event, whereas we had over 200 participating remotely in UKNOF 48, the first hybrid event. And I'm also very pleased to say that there were no reported COVID transmissions as a result of this event. So I feel overall that was a fairly good success of this hybrid format. And I'd like to just finish with a huge thank you to Manchester Central and the venue staff there, to Portfast, our connectivity partner, and Bogons, our AV and streaming partner, and all of the crew who turned up on the day of UKNOF 48 to both set up, facilitate the event, and eventually tear it down. And that is the end of my material. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Marek. That was really, really interesting. So the next person we're going to have speaking is Edward McNair. He's the Executive Director from NANOG. So Edward, if you could start sharing your slides and unmute yourself. Just check we can see and hear you.
Perfect. My name is Edward McNair, and I'm the Executive Director of NANOG, the North American Network Operators Group. I'm going to take a little bit of different approach than Marek did. I'm going to kind of roll back to how this all started with the pandemic and kind of focus on how it's changed our organization and some of the challenges that we faced in going forward. So when COVID hit, we asked ourselves a series of questions. One, how do we keep our staff and community safe? We are a community event organization, or specifically we were, and how do we maintain relevance in not being able to put on an event, a face-to-face event? Can we manage the manage financially without having physical events? And how long will the pandemic last? So like everyone else, we found ourselves scrambling. Due to the uncertainty about what's happening when the pandemic started, it took several weeks for us to determine whether or not we could have an in-person event, and coming to the conclusion that just wasn't a possibility. Once the decision was made to go virtual, we had a contractor who was handling the streaming events for our face-to-face meetings, and they were able to help us deliver our first event. But soon after, and the event was a success, for our first virtual event, we had about, I'd say a little over 800 people attend virtually for our event, which was a good number for us, and went fairly well. There were some small technical issues, but they were mostly due to people not having the features they wanted from the platform. But then after that meeting was over, due to scheduling conflicts and scarcity in the marketplace, we were left without a streaming provider for our event in the fall, which we were forced to expedite the development of our own virtual platform, which we were able to do in 3 months' time. The reason why we chose to do our own virtual platform, because NANOG has specific needs and the size of our audience, and we didn't feel that Zoom was going to give us the flexibility that we needed and the experience that our community would be looking for. So chaos can create opportunity. And for us, we were in a position where we could take advantage of that chaos. We shifted some of our development that we were working on for other things and put it full forward into growing up a virtual platform, which allow us to do hybrid meetings moving forward. So for the virtual platform we have the ability to stream video from any platform. We have flexible display options where you can see it full screen, chat onto one side, chat underneath, chat separately, Zoom integration for those panels that would need it, real-time chat, built-in Q&A, online help, virtual booths for our sponsors, and real-time polling through third-party support. And that is the only piece that we use. It's actually third-party. Everything else was built on open source standards. Once those first 2 meetings had finished and we had completed our first virtual event that we had done in-house, we then went on to do more development. We developed an event management system, which also has the option to support other industry events. We've also opened it up for local NOGs to be able to use our virtual platform as well if they so choose to. We developed an event registration system. Before we were using a service called Cvent, and it was expensive, and it also had Lots of restrictions, lots of problems. We were able to tailor a system specifically for us, which allowed us to support in-person registration, virtual registrations, registrations for other team members, membership purchases, renewals, and also donations. We've also been able to implement a 360 live view in a separate window that allows virtual attendees to be able to see the event live in a 360 view where they can pivot the screen around and see all views, giving them an experience like being in an event itself. We're currently working on a meeting appointment tool that is under development, is targeted for release for NANOG 85 in Montreal, which will be in June. In shifting to online, we come to the understanding on online that content is king. And for me as executive director and for the team and also for the board, what we wanted to focus on was being able to engage our audience beyond just the 3 conferences that we have a year. So we first started rolling out NANOG TV, where we would highlight talks from the hundreds of previous NANOG events. We've instituted monthly webinars, which are kind of targeting students and those who are new to the industry. We're increasing our community engagement by developing meaningful newsletters, blogs, interactive polls, and engaging social media. We've also recently released our Internet Innovator series, where it's a video that focuses on pivotal individuals who helped shape the internet as we have known it today. We've interviewed Vint Cerf, we've interviewed Jeff Houston. We've also completed a recent interview with Kleinrock from who was kind of part of the Vint team that helped develop the first node. And recently at NANOG 84, I had the pleasure of interviewing Radia Perlman, and she's going to be next up in our Internet Innovator series. To broaden our scope beyond just being a 3-event-a-year organization, we're currently working with ISOC and ICANN on outreach initiatives across North America. We are committed to providing structured educational programs at our conferences, plus online. We're developing a mentorship program to help new members in our community further their careers. We took the step to reinvent our hackathon. Before it was sponsor-based and the sponsor would determine what the hack would be. We now have focused on engaging industry professionals and students. And we're very fortunate, not this hackathon, but the hackathon before. One of the dreams that the PC had was to be able to get open source initiatives to be a part of our hackathon. And Leo was able to make that happen. And in this last hackathon that we had at night, NANOG 84, we had 7 open source projects that were being worked on simultaneously with other hacks that were going on. We've now brought in an odds buds person to support diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging within our community, because we're very well aware that if we don't make changes, we're going to want to attract new people. We want those people to feel welcome within our organization. So we need to focus on what we can do to make NANOG a more inviting place. The financial impact, there is no free lunch, and COVID really had an effect on all of us and on NANOG specifically. We're fortunate that previous boards had made the determination to kind of stow away cash reserves so that in case of a rainy day, NANOG would be able to weather the storm. And the board had decided during that time period to, yes, move cautiously, but also they realized that we had to commit to development to be able to, one, transition to a virtual platform, which we knew when we made that decision that it was going to be a part of our reality and that we were making that decision as the foundation of going to hybrid meetings in the future. But in this past year, we experienced a net loss of about $300,000 from our income. Our expenses, as you can see, the big chunk is always overhead, which is about half of it. And where kind of dollars were spent. And then here's our total assets, as it were, for December 2021. I mean, we're in good shape, but we couldn't endure a pandemic like this for forever. Our hopes is that our first hybrid meeting was in NANOG 83 in Minneapolis. And at that event, we had about a little over 300 attendees. And then we did get two people who came up with COVID afterwards. In this last event we had in Austin, Texas, we had about 440 people attending in person. And so far, there's been no indication that anyone suffered from COVID as a result of that. So I'm hoping that our meeting in Montreal will continue to grow the numbers on top of that. And then I think that our meeting in Hollywood will kind of get back to pacing to have an audience that we would typically have at a NANOG meeting, which would range from 1,000 to 1,400 people, depending on the location. Some specific kind of focuses on how the pandemic affected us. Here's some kind of numbers looking at how many people attended the hybrids in 83 meeting. There's the 1980 when we had our first virtual attendees. NANOG 77 pre-pandemic, we had about 1,100 people who were participated in our in-person events. Sponsorship dwindled during virtual events, and I'm sure you guys experienced that as well. The pandemic has continued to affect attendees and presenters' ability to travel. In our particular approach to virtual meetings, we prefer to pre-record content to make sure that if there's any technical glitches, at least the audience will be able to see the presentations. And then we have the speakers waiting to be put in through Zoom live for Q&A at the end of the pre-recorded speech. So lessons learned and challenges for a small nonprofit. And now here I am coming after UKNOF, but NANOG in terms of groups that put on events our size are relatively small. Here's the NANOG staff. There are 7 of us, including myself. We have a board of directors, which I'm also a part of, which are 8 people. But again, small, according to organizations that put on conferences the size that we do. So what did we learn from COVID? Well, COVID exposed our weaknesses. We've come to realize that sponsors want face-to-face engagement, and they're more and more concerned about return on investment. Being small has its advantages in that we were able to make changes quickly, but being small has its disadvantages. Resources are limited. And we need to explore new sources of revenue so we can maintain the momentum that we have as an organization. The world has changed since COVID, and it may never be the way it was before, and we're all going to have to adapt and change to that. Kind of final thoughts on the virtual process and hybrids and et cetera. The plan that got us to this point may not be the plan to get us to the next point. We need to always be willing to evaluate any process or procedures that we have within an organization. Change is essential to any living thing. It's what defines things that are alive, things that change, have cellular mutations, et cetera. That's part of being alive. Things that are stagnant will ultimately die. That change is difficult. And that and the question that the board has challenged me with, and vice versa, is if we were to build our organization completely from scratch today, what would it look like? We sometimes focus so much on our legacies, but we don't realize that things have changed. And being part of groups that are technology driven, it's all about change. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Edward. That was really, really interesting to see. I'll just take this chance to remind anyone, if people do have questions they want to ask the panelists, you can start queuing them up now, by the way, in Zoom, so that you don't forget them by the time we get to the second half. So pop them in the Q&A and we can ask them in the second half. But yeah, thanks, Edward. That was very, very interesting. Now we're going to have our panel chair introduce herself. We're going to have Mirjam, who's the right chair, So Mirjam, please could you unmute yourself and share your screen? And we'll just check we can see you.
Thanks, James. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, you're very clear.
Great. Thanks. Yes, I'm Mirjam Kuehne, and I'm the VIPE chair, and I have a few slides to share with you as well. Let me see if that works. Can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, so it's really interesting to listen because we're all doing similar work, but I think we're all very different, and we've also approached this this pandemic in a different way. But we'll, I'm sure, yeah, we can all learn from each other, of course. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, VIPE, I mean, VIPE is a bit like UKNOF and NANOG, but just kind of a bit in the European space, you know, a bit bigger than UKNOF maybe, but I mean, in terms of geography. But we've kind of been through the same challenges, of course. Yeah, I've been selected as VIPE chair in October 2020, and the chair before me had already chaired like one remote or one online event, and I started right kind of smack in the middle of the pandemic. And I've actually never seen the community face to face so far in my role as VIPE chair. And, you know, I keep thinking like I'll be the first chair who will actually just do the whole chairing remotely and never have the opportunity to see you all again. But I think there's light at the end of the tunnel now. So let me just quickly go through what we've been doing so far. Oh, don't tell me the slides don't move. Yes, they do move. So we had 4 online meetings since the pandemic starting in May 2020, and then we usually have like 2 VIPE meetings a year. And so the last one was last year in November. And we've also started to have more interim sessions like this one today. Not so frequently, but some of the VIPE working groups have started doing interim online sessions, and also we've had a couple of like more generic kind of VIPE discussions, like continuations of discussions that we had at VIPE meetings. And I really like to see that continue also in the future, because in the past everything always revolved around the VIPE meetings. And physical, obviously, people are excited to see each other there, but it's really good to see some activities also now in between the VIPE meetings, and especially since everything is kind of online anyway. So what have we been using in terms of tools and platforms? We've actually, for the first meeting, we've used Zoom, and also we had a kind of a shortened VIPE meetings. I think there were 3 days only, and we felt this is like more than enough. And then the next meeting we already extended it to 4 days, and the last 2 meetings we had like a full-blown VIPE meeting week, you know, basically like the ones before, except we did have shorter sessions and longer breaks so that people have some time to kind of breathe and do other work that they had to do. So after the first one where we were using Zoom, we actually used MeetEcho, and I've known the MeetEcho team, the guys there from the ITF. The ITF has been using MeetEcho for many years, and I always felt they're doing a really good job in integrating remote participants in the physical ITF meetings. You know, there were many remote presenters already, and you could participate quite actively, even if we weren't in the room. So I really liked that, and also I enjoyed working with the team. So we got them to provide the platform for the VIPE meetings, and they were really great to work with, and customize everything, and basically responded to all the nitty-gritty feature requests that we had, and also the audience had. And I think by now we have a really good platform together there, where everything is integrated in that one platform, similar to what Edward has just described, that they've also built for NANOG, and we're just using that MeetEcho platform. As a virtual, or now as a social platform, we were using Spatial Chat. And the first 2 meetings, I think they worked pretty well, and people were really excited to use that and to see little bubbles kind of move around, and you could talk to each other. The last couple of meetings, people were, I think they were just getting tired. And it's like, well, so, you know, social interaction on a screen just really isn't the same. Yeah, we don't know how this would go moving forward. We'll have to see how we integrate that also then with the physical events. So what worked well so far, I mean, we didn't even have a hybrid meeting yet. You know, so you're way ahead of what we've been doing so far. We've only had remote meetings over the last 2 years, but we felt, you know, the attendance numbers were higher. Definitely, what you also said, it was easier to attend, no travel, no cost, kind of easier, no hurdles to attend. The participation was quite good, I felt, even though people, like, comparing it with physical meetings, obviously it's not the same. But relatively speaking to online events, I think we had good discussions and good interactions, even online. And the meeting platforms work really well. And we also managed to have some fun. I mean, the RIPE NCC, they were great, meeting support in the background, and they did everything to make people feel comfortable. We had some stretching sessions. We had quizzes. They were very popular. We even continued to have the childcare. I thought I was really proud of that, because we introduced the childcare for the physical meetings to allow people to attend and not have to stay home with the kids. And we continue to do that even in the virtual settings where kids could learn some coding and parents could participate in the RIPE meeting. That was really neat. What I see as challenges, I mean, my one main part, and I would really like to continue to discuss this maybe also in the next session, is that I feel it's really, while it's easier to attend because you don't have to travel, I think it's really hard for new people. And while we all know that our communities thrive on like personal interaction and trust, and you build trust over time, you get introduced to people. It's really hard to build that relationship on the screen. So I was kind of getting worried that when, if this pandemic continues longer and we would not be able to meet each other again, when we would kind of lose and the new people to come into our communities, and we would slowly kind of die out. This would be the last generation of network operator meetings. But yeah, so moving into hybrid, I think we really have to see how we can combine these two. A number of submissions was lower. Also, I don't know if you noticed that also, that people were a little hesitant to present online. They were looking forward to the next physical meetings. We still had good content, though. The program committee did a good job there. So yeah, the future, I mean, we're going to Berlin. We've postponed that 2 times now. And I think this is the last time where the hotel said, okay, now or never, we can't postpone it anymore. So we're hoping, or we're currently planning to have the first physical meeting again in Berlin in May, and making it a full kind of hybrid meeting. And so we want to keep the good remote participation, like facilities, like with MeetEcho, and also some social platforms. But I also think that, coming back to what I said earlier, and how to integrate like the remote participants and make sure new people feel comfortable, I think we all kind of have to change also our behavior. And what Edward just said, change is good. So not only did we have to change in this online setting, but I think also in the hybrid settings. And I'm curious to hear from you later how you experience that. How to integrate people that are remote and that they don't feel second class, and how to make sure we kind of feel still as one community and not have 2 separate meetings. And so I think basically we'll just kind of learn from each other how we do things. And now the RIPE NCC meeting team, they're definitely going to the ITF to see how they're doing things and how they're dealing with the COVID restrictions and every setup that's happening in Vienna and the ITF. And generally, I mean, I think I'm really looking forward to a discussion later on to see how we can learn from the other organizers. I think that's all from my side. And no questions, no, wrong. Stop sharing. Questions later.
That's great. Thanks, Mirjam. That's really interesting to hear. It's definitely going to make this an interesting discussion later on. So yeah, that's good. Okay, so we have another introduction now from another one of our panelists. We're going to hear from Melchior, who's a board member at NLNOG. So Melchior, could you please share your slides and unmute yourself, and we'll just check we can see your slides and hear you okay?
You should be able to see my slides, my video, and hear me.
Yep, all of them. Yep.
All right, that sounds good. Thanks, James. So, hello, my name is Melchior Aelmans. I am one of the board members of NLNOG, the Netherlands Network Operator Group. And I wanted to start with a small introduction for those who are not familiar with NLNOG. We are a non-profit foundation called Stichting NLNOG, registered at the Chamber of Commerce. We are all volunteers, so the board members are volunteers, and we rely heavily on other volunteers as well to help us organize events, to help us with some of the tools we develop and maintain. I'll mention those later on as well. And only during events we obviously rely on professionals for some parts as well, for example, for video streaming and organizing the event. So what do we do? We have 3 events a year. Normally, that would be the New Year's drinks in January, a midsummer event that the concept changes. So at one point we had a meet the expert sessions, and we went camping one time as well. And in September, we always organize the NLNOG Day, which is the typical NOG conference day, as you can see in the picture. So obviously, for all these 3 events, COVID made us change a lot. So when COVID hit, we immediately switched to virtual events. Where I think one of the most important things we changed was the length of the event. So instead of where NLNOG Day normally is a full day event, we decided to split things up in shorter events, as obviously it's harder to keep folks interested and following if it's a full day. So we figured let's do a couple of hours there, which is easier to plan, but also easier for your attention span. Besides that, we also maintain, host, and help develop some open source tools. For example, NLNOG Ring, which is a measurement project where you can measure latency and performance to your network from around the world. And we also have an IRR Explorer and a BGP filter guide. One of the things we might do a little bit different as to UKNOF and NANOG is that all our events are free of costs for the attendees. We attract somewhere in between 80 and 250 visitors from both the Netherlands, but also internationally. And obviously, pre-COVID, many would have traveled to either Amsterdam or the location where we would organize one of the 3 events. But we always made sure to also stream all the events, because there's obviously many folks who don't have the resources to travel or won't get funding from their employer. And one of our goals is to share knowledge and information. And so we try to always do that, as said, free of cost, but also stream via YouTube Live, publish all the presentations via YouTube, but also for those who cannot, or where company policy, for example, doesn't allow to watch YouTube on a corporate device, we would also stream via the NLNOG website. So quickly, the crew, we are with 6 people currently, as mentioned, all volunteers, and we rely heavily on many other volunteers who help us, especially maintaining all these tools I mentioned. But also during the events, many folks always apply, or many folks are always interested in helping us out during the event, during the day. We are funded mainly via sponsoring. You see the sponsors we had during NLNOG Day 2021, which we could luckily organize in person or hybrid, I should say. And we also receive some donations now and then. But as I mentioned, we don't ask the attendees for anything to join the event. So it's great to have sponsors. Many of these sponsors also stayed during COVID. We don't have a sponsor model where you pay per event or where you can get paid speaker slots. At NLNOG, you always sponsor for a year. So basically, for your sponsoring, you will be sponsoring each of these 3 events, but also the development and maintenance of the tools I mentioned. So some of the lessons learned from COVID. Interestingly, we sort of, as I mentioned, were halfway hybrid already, because we would stream the whole day. We already had a video crew who would help us with the video in the room, but also with the streaming part. So the biggest change probably was on their side, because now, especially during NLNOG Day 2021, they not only had to stream, but also take in streams from remote presenters. One thing we found out by doing so is that the internet connection at the event location needs to be even bigger or better and a bigger pipe than before, because instead of only streaming, we now would receive streams as well. We also learned that you need to offer many options for folks to, so for presenters to stream, as obviously not everyone can or will use tools like Zoom. Others might prefer Jitsi, etc. So we ended up with a couple of laptops and different options for presenters. What I found really good, and I noticed that at other events as well, that you need to create a sort of seamless integration experience between remote and on-site. So also make sure that your remote presenters can hear what is happening in the room. I presented that personally, for example, an event where my presentation was translated, but also the questions were translated back to me. But I could also hear the asker of the question in the native language. That really made me as a presenter feel to be part of the event, but also the other way around, right? Where folks in the room can ask questions live to the presenter. As I already mentioned, I think, and we figured that worked quite well, that remote meetings or remote-only meetings should be short and to the point. Right? No lengthy presentations. Ask your presenters to preferably have a shorter but more to the point presentation, and don't plan for a whole day, but maybe split it up in multiple sessions or a couple of hours. And make sure if you are planning an event that you don't schedule too many remote presentations after another, because then the folks in the room obviously will get distracted because they are only watching at a screen while there's no presenter, but so it's harder to keep your attention. Also, as not everyone, as I already mentioned, will be on Zoom or your own platform, provide text only or at least additional channels for attendees to ask questions. Right, in our case, we have an IRC channel, but folks can also use YouTube comments, for example, etc. Live presentations are preferred. I noticed that, or we noticed that folks presenting live, even remote, the presentations are more lively. There's more interaction. It feels less synthetic, probably. It's really hard, and it's probably the hardest thing to do during a presentation is to replace the hallway conversations. We have used GatherTown, which works really well, which really gave a nice atmosphere and made people connect and chat as well. So it's sort of a good substitute for it. To close it down, this is how NLNOG Day 2021 looked behind the scenes. So as you can see on the right side, there's the laptops I mentioned with all the different tools for speakers to connect. As I said, I think this will be the way forward, at least for now, where hybrid is definitely the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melchior. That's really interesting. It's interesting that each of these different panelists have got both some shared experiences and some different ones. So the next person we're going to hear from is Mark Kisby. He's the Managing Director at AV Department. I'm hoping Mark's going to provide quite a different point of view to the people who've been before him. So Mark, can you unmute yourself, please, and start showing your slides, and we'll just check we can see them and we can hear you.
And can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's hope I can provide a slightly different perspective. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Kisby. I'm the Managing Director of AV Department Limited. AV Department Limited are an audiovisual supplier. And before Brexit and pre-pandemic, we were just purely in-room provision of simultaneous interpretation and large-scale microphone discussion systems. So the kind of booths that you see on display there and that you see in the back of news conferences at NATO and the places like that, and all the microphones that people would normally use. So that's where we were pre-Brexit, pre-pandemic. So everything was brought in trucks, transported and built on site, all participants on site, all squeezed in, as you can see in that on there. And everybody was expected to attend, and there was not a camera in sight. To have a camera on site and to have anybody remote was very much not the norm. It was something that you would only bring in should you have bad weather, somebody got snowed in, missed a flight, or something else like that. It was always expected that you would be on site. As expected, you know, all your other normal events would have been like that. So then before the pandemic but after Brexit, we started to see that there was actually a need for remote participation, remote interpretation for languages, mainly because of the pressures on venues to actually build this kind of equipment on site in a very short space of time. Our first speaker was talking that everybody got there on site in the morning and everything was ready to go by the afternoon. When you're dealing with interpretation booths and languages and things like that, that's obviously can be quite difficult. So there was venue pressures in times for that, and also there was ecology concerns as well, whereby transporting all this kit and everybody flying around, the interpreters flying around, people were thinking about the ecology concerns. And also there had been sort of like some air crashes recently, and a whole load of interpreters who were going to a UN meeting or a NATO meeting in Egypt, unfortunately all perished on a big airliner disaster. And that caused a lot of interpreters to think, why are we traveling when we know we can start doing this remotely? And also post Brexit, there was some real travel concerns and possible restrictions for people being able to get visas to attend events. So again, sort of like the remote side of things was sort of like beginning to come into play before the pandemic. So when the pandemic actually started, AV Department, as mainly in-room AV contractor and supplier, lost 90% of our business overnight. It was an absolute nightmare. From running like 250 shows in a year, we were down to, I think on the first year, I think we ran something like 40 events. And most of those events were things like British Sign Language support to the Scottish Parliament. They called us when the first lockdown started and said, we know you've got a remote studio, can it do video for BSL? And having set it up for just audio, we said, yeah, of course we can. So 24 hours notice, we turned around the entire studio to be video for British Sign Language to the Scottish Parliament. So that was a fun time. And our output, by the time we finished doing the BSL for the Scottish Parliament, our output was actually better quality than the Scottish Parliament were providing beforehand. And now they've brought it back in-house again. It's sort of like fallen back a bit. So we're still quite proud of the content that we provided for them during that time. So obviously by June, during the pandemic, 2020, like everybody else, we had to start using Zoom, and we started providing interpretation to Zoom calls through a second studio, because the first studio was taken up with the BSL by this time again. So we built a second studio in what was our warehouse, and that is in fact where I'm talking to you from now, is our second studio. And we combined, this was a bit of a hybrid. We had interpreters in Spain, in France, and we had interpreters actually on site as well inside the studio. And we were injecting audio into the standard kit and outputting audio into the Zoom interpretation channels. And this was a very steep learning curve, especially for this particular event. We had a very multilingual audience. And of course, what happens when you have a multilingual audience is somebody likes to listen in one language but present in another. But Zoom being, very clever, but not that clever, when you're listening to English and you start to speak French, Zoom thinks because you're listening to English, you're also speaking English, and it combines the two on Zoom, and you get horrendous crosstalk between your original audio and then also the interpreter who's also trying to interpret for you as well. So tip for you there for Zoom: if you're listening in a language, speak in that language. Otherwise, it causes all kinds of problems. So this is one of our first hybrid events, which was in July 2020, quite early on. This was for the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. As you can see, hybrid meant it was just really the top table that was allowed in, and we provided Zoom support and audiovisual support to this event, which went off very successfully. They used Zoom. They were planning to use Teams, but ended up using Zoom. Then we started to get better during the pandemic with Zoom interpretation. This is when we started working for ISOC. And we've had a very good relationship working with ISOC, providing their languages for some of their events. Not all of them, but some of them. And that's been an excellent move for us, and hopefully for ISOC too. So by September 2020, things were beginning to relax out of the first lockdown here again, and we started to do bigger hybrid events. As you can see in this one here, we've combined camera control or cameras with a large-scale microphone discussion system in the room. As you can see, everybody in the background there is socially distanced, and this was interfaced with Teams as well through the microphone discussion system.
Mark, just to let you know, you've got 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. Thank you very much. So by November 2020, we started hosting events in our own studio, and we started using vMix. vMix is a fantastic tool if you want to provide excellent production, and also it's used for camera control. And by November 2022, we started integrating interpretation in hybrid events using Interprify. This is for the Scottish Parliament during COP26, when we were using Interprify as a streaming platform. But again, we injected all the audio into the parliamentary systems to allow them to, all the downstream systems to continue as normal. Again, during the COP26 summits, more hybrid events. This used 7 languages. We provided the outgoing streaming for the original, and also did IR broadcast for the languages coming back, again, via Interprify. So towards the end of last year, November 2022, that's not happened yet, but there you go. Sorry about that. So by November 2021, I should be saying, we were integrating camera and microphone control, so that cameras actually cut with microphones, and they're all pre-prepared, so that when a microphone switches on, the camera pan tilts, zooms to that focus point, and provides excellent video quality and content to your online participants. And it means also, because it's automated, you have less crew, but it does mean it takes a little bit longer to set up. So here we are now, sort of like coming up with the post-pandemic, and we've morphed from an on-site supplier to a specialist supplier for remote interpretation and hybrid meetings, making sure that everything is all integrated and as automated as much as possible for your live audience and also for your remote audience. So that just about wraps up my contribution, a bit of a gallop through our transition from on-site to hybrid. And yeah, hopefully you'll have some questions for me on the technical aspects, and I might be able to answer during the Q&A after the break. So over back to you.
Thanks, Mark. That was very interesting, just as I expected. Yeah, and quite different. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
So before we start the panel session, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break so everyone can sort of refresh themselves. So we will rejoin at sort of 5-6 past the hour, so people can go and take a quick break now. Just before we break, I'll just say a quick thanks to our patrons, which are Flex Optics, IP Version 4 Market Group, Hilco Stream Bank, and ISC, and thanks to our partners, Pogons and Portfast. Because without all these people, we wouldn't be here. So thank you very much to them, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.